up next, we have a fireside chat with Chloe White and Nathan Catania. So Nathan is going to be moderating or managing this conversation with Chloe today. He's a partner at XReg, and Chloe White is the managing director at Genesis Block. I did see that Chloe had a conversation a little bit similar to this at Upside Down last week, and I didn't realise, Chloe, that you were in the country. So this conversation today is titled Building the Digital Asset Landscape in the Middle East, Regulatory Compliance and Opportunities in Dubai. So I'm going to bring Nathan up to the stage now. Let's see. Here he is. Oh, he's there. I just didn't see you. The screen was too small. Hi, Chloe. Hi, Nathan. I'm going to leave you both to it. It's going to be interesting.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Warm welcome to everyone joining for what surely will be a great insight into the blockchain ecosystem and regulatory environment in Dubai. My name is Nathan. I'll be moderating the session today. I'm a partner at a consulting group called XReg. And fun fact, the reason we're called XReg is because we're a team of ex-regulators. So I had the pleasure of being the regulator in Gibraltar, which is where I'm from. And it's where I'm currently based and where many of our people are based. And we were actually one of the first jurisdictions to have a bespoke framework for what we call DLT providers before virtual asset was even a term used by the FATF. So my partners and I, we set up XReg 3 years ago. We've been advising clients both in the public and private sector on crypto policy and regulatory strategy. We do a lot of cross-border jurisdictional work for our clients, primarily in licensing and jurisdiction analysis. And Dubai definitely is a jurisdiction that's been increasingly attractive for many of our clients and our contacts. And has been evident in the sessions today, the jurisdictional approach towards crypto varies significantly, to put it lightly. You've got on one end of the spectrum regulation by enforcement, applying existing laws towards crypto, arguably trying to fit square pegs in round holes. Doesn't usually work from experience and from what most of the industry is experiencing. You do have some jurisdictions in the middle, taking maybe more of a cautious approach to crypto. They're making efforts to understand it, but mainly for risk mitigation purposes and very much to protect consumers. And that's the priority of these jurisdictions. And then finally, really what you have is what personally I find very refreshing is jurisdictions that are taking much more of an agile approach. They're embracing blockchain innovation and they're trying to find a balance. They're trying to find a balance between innovation and having a solid regulatory framework. And when it comes to fostering this environment that embraces blockchain, it does feel that few places are rivaling Dubai at the moment. So today, I'm joined by none other than Chloe White. Chloe is an award-winning consultant. She supports innovative teams with regulatory licensing, risk management, fundraising. She helped design Dubai's framework for virtual assets, and she was previously the blockchain policy lead within the Australian government. She's also chair of the Blockchain Australia's Digital Assets Working Group. She's on the advisory board of the RMIT University School of Economics, Finance and Marketing. And after the growth of her consulting business in Australia, she's brought her services to international markets in 2022. Her advisory portfolio now spans 30 companies across 5 continents, including tokenization, asset management, and venture capital. Thank you again, Chloe, for joining us today. So I guess to kick things off, let's maybe take a step back, and I'd like to ask a question that probably is going through everyone's mind at the moment, and it's probably the first question that anyone would ask you right now. And really it comes to this flow of talent and capital to Dubai. And the question really, I guess, that I think everyone's asking right now is why Dubai? What's making Dubai so special?
Yeah, I think Dubai's been getting a lot of attention in the last year. Last year, Dubai legislated that it would establish a brand new regulator that is dedicated to the crypto industry, and that rather than taking this square peg round hole approach that you mentioned in your introduction, that they would create regulations that have the integrity of traditional financial markets, but that they would apply them in a way that made sense for the industry. And that regime is now live and up and running, and licenses are being awarded now. And so I think that one of the other important things to note about Dubai is it's not only that there is a regulator dedicated to the industry with rules that are bespoke to the products and services and the governance structures of the space, but also the fact that Dubai is a melting pot of international talent and experience. It also is one of the most attractive destinations in the world for raising capital at the moment. So it's that combination of talent, capital, and a policy framework that I think has really been a beautiful trifecta to help the virtual asset industry flourish in Dubai.
Great. And maybe just pick on one of the points. So there's many jurisdictions that do have bespoke frameworks towards crypto, but Dubai seems to be the only, or one of the only jurisdictions that has its own regulator dedicated to this industry. So what do you say the benefits of this are, and how has that attracted businesses, and how would this contrast to jurisdictions that maybe do have a bespoke framework, but they're still using their traditional securities regulators, for example, to regulate this space?
I think that the magic lies in the comprehensiveness of the regime. My observation is seeing some of the jurisdictions that acted really early, and some legislation that passed around 5 years ago, those regimes tended to focus specifically on ICOs. Broadly across the world, it's very common that you see that there are registration processes for exchanges, but that is not the same as a license. So in terms of ICO, that obviously was very popular activity and product around 5-6 years ago. But as you mentioned, Nathan, they were administered out of traditional regulatory agencies. And in some cases, the regulators, where they struggled was actually in the implementation phase, trying to keep up with all of the applications. And I think that what is useful to note here is that now we have licenses to give financial advice, do asset managing, do custody, as well as a license to run an exchange or run a brokerage. And there are also rules around token issuance as well. So it is a very comprehensive regime. There are multiple licenses that you can apply for different activities and services. And so it welcomes a broader range of business models than what we've seen in the past. Great.
And I guess that's something that definitely we found very unique about the regime in Dubai. A lot of jurisdictions are taking the FATF definitions, which is focusing maybe on exchange activity, custody. But if you look at the activities in the Dubai framework, you can actually be licensed for some things that you can't even be licensed in other jurisdictions. So things like lending and borrowing, investment, that kind of stuff. So maybe let's go a bit deeper into the Dubai regime. So could you give us an overview? And I appreciate we could talk about this for hours, but maybe just an overview for anyone that's coming from outside, like what is involved very high level in establishing a crypto business in Dubai, and what does a regulatory framework look like?
Yeah, so I think that for a lot of people who are crypto native, their starting point in these kinds of conversations tends to be, am I a security token or a utility token? And a lot of people have become armchair experts in the Howey test. And we hear a lot about US regulations and US policies. So, here we're at Australian Blockchain Week, and the Australian regime, has its own structure. But I think that at a high level, what's important to note about the regime that's administered by the Dubai government under VARA, which is the Virtual Assets Regulatory Agency, it bypasses this whole debate about, am I a security token or a utility token? It just captures everything inside of its regulatory perimeter, but it has a risk-adjusted approach to the particular types of regulations and rules that will apply to particular products and services and tokens within the space. So it is comprehensive, as I've said. It does have quite a few similarities to the MICA regime in the EU, which isn't yet in force, but has passed Parliament. But I think that the cool thing about the VARA regime being so comprehensive in terms of the regulatory perimeter is you don't have to go through this lengthy process and engaging lawyers and trying to figure out, well, like, am I utility or this or that? If you are doing something with a token, if you're on a blockchain, you're captured in the regulatory perimeter. So then it just becomes a matter of understanding what type of service that you need to be licensed to provide to the market.
Perfect. And as you said, it's very much an activity-based regime. There's a lot of guidance for each type of service that you're providing. So you do have that clarity, and it's quite, I wouldn't say easy, because being regulated is never that easy, but you do have this these standards that you can follow, and a lot of guidance coming out from the regulator, which is definitely really positive. Maybe let's just hone in on the broadness of the regime, which is really positive. But could it capture certain activities that maybe would find it challenging to be regulated? And maybe talking about some of the exotic stuff like DeFi NFTs. What's the approach there? Because that varies significantly from jurisdictions, and we've seen there is international pressure. So the FATF a couple of days ago, they released their update on jurisdictions' progress, and this is very much AML focused. But one of the key points there was DeFi and how there's a lot of projects that are like self-labeling as DeFi, but really they should be in the regulatory perimeter. They also mention NFTs, which is a bit of a gray area. A lot of jurisdictions are completely ignoring NFTs. Some jurisdictions are taking more of like a strict approach and scoping in all NFTs, which maybe is the wrong approach as well. So with maybe some of the more exotic stuff, how does this broadness of the regime interact with some of these more like novel businesses and projects as well?
That's a good point. A lot of jurisdictions have stuck their head in the sand about NFTs, or they're now only starting to ask the question of, oh, we've thought about exchanges and we've thought about these other things, but what are we going to do about NFTs? So NFTs are already in the VARA regulations, and it's a good example to address because this is coming back to the point that I was making about the risk-adjusted approach. And so there are carve-outs in the regulations, and they're stipulated and defined, that say that if you are operating a kind of low-risk market or token system, then you may not have to comply to the same rules as some of the other products and services. So that is, I think, a good example that you've called out about the comprehensiveness and the broadness of the regulatory perimeter. I think that what is going to surprise some prospective licensees about this regime is more so about that it actually holds companies to a very high bar in terms of their governance and their transparency and their reporting requirements. And this is where it does look more similar to a traditional financial market type of regime. It's certainly a lot more rigorous than what has been applied in some of the earlier jurisdictions, such as in the Bahamas. And so it does hold companies to a high standard. I think that because the government of Dubai is known to be so welcoming to this industry, that maybe some companies had gotten the impression that being regulated was going to be easy. But as you said, Nathan, it's never easy to be a regulated entity. And VARA as a regulator, prides itself on wanting to operate as a world-class regulator and hold its regulated community to a high standard. So it's not so much the particular crypto assets or the different categories of virtual assets that create a challenge. It's more so the fact that for companies who have never operated in a regulated environment before, this may be the first time that they actually had to hold themselves to these kinds of standards around governance, transparency, and reportability.
Perfect. Yeah, that really resonates with me. When I was back in the regulator a few years ago, a lot of innovative projects, but some teams that didn't really have that regulatory experience, and definitely can be a bit of a shock to the system when you have to up your standards and apply for an authorization. Very encouraging to hear though that there is an element of being pragmatic. And even though there are high standards, when you are looking at these more innovative models, it is quite hard sometimes to apply the traditional regulatory systems and some of the requirements that you see in most other regimes. So that flexibility definitely is very encouraging. One of the things that we see with regulatory regimes as well, it's very difficult to understand really what the quirks are from reading something cold and just going through the regulations in its entirety, because as we said, it is quite comprehensive. So I'm thinking maybe you could share some like interesting quirks or some fun facts that you just want to share with the audience that may not be apparent by just reading the regulations. So is there anything you'd like to share with us today?
Yes, hundreds of pages of legalese is not everybody's cup of tea for bedtime reading. But I think one thing that I think is quite novel about the regime is that it actually differentiates between staking and yield or interest products. Obviously, yield products were a huge theme of the past 12 months in the regulated community following the collapse of Terra Luna. So it is quite noteworthy that under the VARA regime, as a consumer, you actually know what you're getting. Is this really a staking product, or is it simply an interest or yield offering? So a couple of other things that are close to my heart about the design of this policy framework is the protocol neutrality. The principle of technology neutrality is something that gets raised a lot, especially in Australia and elsewhere around the world. But the protocol neutrality, I think, is a really important extension of that principle. And some examples of how it's been applied in the VARA regime is ESG and also privacy coins. So rather than creating prescriptive static lists of saying, well, these particular consensus mechanisms or these particular coins are labeled as being bad at this static point in time, the regulations actually set out, here are our expectations for transparency and reporting. Again, it's a graded approach. It's tiered depending on your activity and your business profile. And depending on the technology and internal policies that you have as a licensed entity, you also need to do a self-assessment of your ability to comply with the principles of the regime. And the regulator holds you to account on that. But the fact that it is principles-based and doesn't have a static point in time kind of list, I think really speaks to the fact that when it comes to issues like ESG and privacy, these things are not actually as black and white as they may appear in some of the partisan debates that have been happening in the US and the EU, for example. And so, for me as a policy wonk, this makes me really happy because it's truly neutral, but it still addresses the issues. It doesn't try to sweep them under the rug. They're right there, for everybody to see. So I think that's certainly some really good leadership from the regulator.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think just looking at some of these unique elements of the regime, I think it also shows the level of understanding that the regulator and the policy setters had when setting this regime. So like going back to the staking point, probably one of the pet hates of mine, where a lot of companies in the industry use the word staking very loosely. So having that guidance and having that understanding that offering a yield on a certain product doesn't necessarily mean staking. And it really does show that the level of understanding that the regulator in Dubai has. And it also shows that they are seeking to address some of these key issues and key topics that are being debated across the world. And like you say, I think there are some, what I view as slightly aggressive proposals when it comes to topics like ESG. And you've seen some jurisdictions even taking really hard stances against proof of work mining, and having this disclosure first system definitely feels like a good first step. Rather than going towards like the drastic end of the spectrum and trying to like ban certain activities without really taking a step back, understanding the risks posed by the activities as well. So yeah, definitely really encouraging. It really shows the level of understanding and appreciation taken by the regulator when even setting some of these rules and regulations and guidance. So let's think about what happens next. So we see there's people queuing up to get licensed in Dubai. There's a few licenses that have been issued now. And again, going back to some of my experiences as a regulator, getting licensed really is the first step in the journey. You get some firms that maybe apply with some very glossy looking application packs, and then really it's when the work starts, when you start supervising the firms, when you start really making sure that what they said they would do, they're actually doing in practice. So maybe could you talk a bit more about like the supervisory strategy that VARA's taken, and what happens after you get licensed in Dubai?
So as you can see in the regulations, once you have obtained a license from VARA, you will be expected to comply with audit and other reporting requirements. The regulator also uses chain analysis tools as a regulated entity. It may end up being quite appropriate for you to do the same as well, depending on your business model, and to be reporting into the regulator based on the different risks and issues. So there is cooperation at a government level, that there is monitoring of the industry on an ongoing basis. There may be, for example, site visits. One thing to be aware of is that there are rules on marketing in the Emirate of Dubai, and this is in keeping with jurisdictions such as Singapore, and it also being explored more in the UK and other jurisdictions where marketing has been a big area of focus. And so you do need to make sure that you're operating in a compliant way as you're communicating your products and services to the public, to make sure that you are continuing to follow these rules, because certainly VARA is an active supervisory and enforcement agency. It's not just handing out licenses, it's also actively monitoring the behavior and performance of its licensed community.
Perfect. And what about the wider ecosystem and doing business in Dubai? So, and I'm thinking things like banking, which has historically and still is a major challenge for the industry. Insurance, provision of services or receiving services from service providers in Dubai. What's the situation looking at it like there?
To be honest, I think it's hard to identify a jurisdiction around the world where the government has been more proactive in educating its banking community than the government of Dubai. And even in terms of the government's partners, you can see that there are conferences and roundtables and workshops happening on a periodic basis where they are actually bringing together the government and regulators and the industry and the banking sector to make sure that there is that constant upskilling and making sure that banks are aware of how the regulatory regime works and what tools are available to them as partners in this value chain. So I think that that's a really encouraging sign that the government is taking seriously the growth of this entire ecosystem and nurturing the industry broadly. It's not just focused on its own narrow mandate of administering a regulatory package. So, and I think it speaks to the nature of doing business in Dubai, which is that there are a lot of public-private partnerships. The government is highly pragmatic. They're very close to industry. They listen to industry. And as you've pointed out, Nathan, that's really apparent when you look at the rules that have been designed for VARA to administer, that it is a very pragmatic regime that shows a lot of knowledge and understanding of the industry. And certainly banking all around the world is one of those top needs and top priorities.
Perfect. Yeah, again, extremely encouraging to hear. I think maybe let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader Middle East now, and the GCC region as well in particular. And it does feel like it's not only Dubai now. It looks like the entire region is really embracing blockchain and crypto. So we've seen Bahrain, for example, has had a regime for a number of years. Oman's recently announced the development of a regulatory framework as well. There's also some transnational projects between central banks in terms of CBDCs. So it is clear the entire region is moving forward with blockchain, which is again, personally really encouraging. So what's your view on the development in the region? And why do you think the GCC really is pushing ahead collectively, I guess, where some other jurisdictions are either dragging their heels or maybe not pushing together as a block, which other than Europe and the GCC is you don't really see that happening in many other places.
Yeah, great examples, Nathan. To add to that list, in the last 12 months, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi are other jurisdictions that have made progress in this space. So, the bulk of the GCC is moving forward. I do think that Dubai, as the leader in this space, has the most comprehensive regime and is the most progressed. But you can clearly see the healthy competition in the Emirates and in the Gulf that drives everybody along. People can see the impact on the ground of how this industry is flourishing in Dubai. And I think that's really healthy for the industry. I think it's really encouraging for the region. And there's a lot of investment flowing into fintech, particularly in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. And this is just a beautiful harmony of all these factors that are so needed in the industry globally right now, where there's a lot of misery and bad news stories coming at us all the time from all corners of the world. But even those central bank partnerships that you mentioned, there was an announcement recently between the Central Bank of the UAE and Hong Kong to partner up. So I think that one of the important things about the vision of Dubai is that yes, all of these regulatory jurisdictions compete hotly with each other, but they're not playing a zero-sum game. The long-term vision of what they have done is that they do want to have international recognition and passportability of licenses. And I think that really resonates with an internet native community, like the virtual asset community, where they don't want to have to deal with 100 different regulatory regimes that all have different rules when they're fundamentally operating on the internet, which is global. And so hopefully we will ultimately see that vision come to life. I think it is a longer term aspiration because it requires international cooperation, and we know that that can be really challenging. But I do think that at the moment we can see that it's not just Dubai acting alone. It's really a lot of jurisdictions across the Middle East that see this opportunity. They see fintech, digital economy, emerging technologies as all being related to their diversification into the knowledge economy and the services sector, which is a really important part of their longer term plans for economic growth and sustainability.
Perfect. I think we are running short on time, so I think just to wrap it up, and it is Australia Blockchain Week after all. So my last question really is, what could Australia learn from the Dubai approach? So if you had to leave one message, what do you think the learning would be?
I think one of the inspiring lessons from Dubai is that it's possible to be creative when it comes to policy, and it doesn't mean that you have to abandon principles-based regulation. If anything, I think the lesson for the Australian policy community would be the inverse of that, which is that we need to really understand what are the assumptions that underpin principles like technology neutrality. We need to actually test those assumptions. And I think at this point, Australia could afford a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking. There hasn't been much evolution in the policy discourse in Australia for a number of years now. We're still kind of grappling with the same issues that we've been talking about for over half a decade. So I would encourage a little bit of, going back to first principles and understanding how can we approach this in a way that still achieves those dual goals of protecting consumers, but also giving regulatory clarity to the space. And I think we have a great case study in Dubai. The message from Dubai is that we're open for business. It is a very welcoming place. And I think everybody should consider the opportunities that come from the type of approach that they have enacted there.
Perfect. So yeah, I think definitely looking at Dubai, definitely a good example of where you can embrace innovation in a balanced way by having a solid regulatory regime to balance things up. So yeah, thank you very much, Chloe. I think that's time for us. Thanks for a really insightful chat about the Dubai regime, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for agreeing to moderate, Nathan. And Amy Rose, for the record, I was in Melbourne for a couple of days, but I'm in Zurich now.
Okay, because it was just sort of like, bam, you're out. I'm like, oh my God.
Yes, well, that's how it felt to me too. I can promise you.
Yeah, all good next year. Well, it's lovely to see you, Chloe, and lovely to meet you, Nathan. Thanks so much for joining the Blockchain Week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Yep, bye.